Damals hieß es noch das Videofilmfest, heute ist es die Transmediale. Und bereits zum 31. Mal findet dieses jährliche Festival zum Thema Kunst und digitale Kultur hier in Berlin statt. Und ich quatsche jetzt einfach mal mit ein paar Leuten und finde heraus, was hier so passiert. Danke, dass Sie sich Zeit genommen haben. Ich habe die erste Frage für Sie. Was ist die Transmediale? Was macht man hier?
Transmediale, das ist ein großes Kunst- und digitale Kulturfestival, wie wir sagen. Aber das ist wirklich ich finde, eine transdisziplinäre Festival, weil hier kommen Künstler, Theoretiker, Wissenschaftler zusammen, um über so 4-5 Tage gesellschaftliche Themen zu diskutieren, neue Projekte zu präsentieren. Wir sind ein Festival, der sozusagen über gesellschaftliche Veränderungen beschäftigen uns ja sehr viel mit Fragen von Digitalisierung, was ja jetzt auch heute wirklich nicht ein Nischenphänomen mehr ist. Das ist ja etwas, was man wirklich auch in Mitte des Politik auch heute diskutieren. Aber das ist hier so ein besonderer Ort, der seit 30 Jahren in Berlin existiert. Und auf einer Seite geht es dann wirklich um, welche neue Möglichkeiten hat neue Medien, neue Technologien für künstlerisches Schaffen und auf der anderen Seite auch, welche gesellschaftliche Wirkung haben diese Veränderungen.
Gibt es denn sowas Ähnliches wie die Transmediale oder inwiefern ist sie besonders in Bezug jetzt auf Deutschland oder halt auch international?
Was besonders ist, dass wir immer so auch eine kritische Reflexion gerne fördern möchten oder eine Art von politischer Bildung, könnte man vielleicht fast sagen. Dass hier sozusagen geht es nicht um Kreativwirtschaft oder sozusagen Zusammenarbeiten mit dem Corporate-Sektor, was manchmal der Fall ist, wenn wir über digitale Kultur sprechen. Wir nehmen wirklich Kunst und Kultur und setzen das in den Vordergrund.
So I'm seeing this exhibition right behind me. I'm seeing a lot of faces. What is this exactly?
So this is 30 different portraits of Chelsea Manning derived from exactly the same DNA data. Chelsea Manning is currently a candidate for Senate in Maryland in the United States. She's the transgender whistleblower who brought attention to the scope of civilian deaths and torture in the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Chelsea had mailed me her hair clippings and cheek swabs out of prison, and I created these 30 different portraits by extracting her DNA and then interpreting it.
Which means that during the process, you had never seen her face before.
Exactly. So I met her first through her DNA. So this idea of imposing identity categories onto people based on reading their data, based on reading their DNA data, or based on all of the electronic data that's being collected about us all the time. So ranging from the kinds of things that Facebook is inferring about who and what we are, and so pushing back against that and showing really how multiple and plural our identities are, and advocating for self-defined identity.
Is that also referencing her gender identity?
Exactly. So that's where it began. So while she was in prison, her image had been totally suppressed. Her face had been essentially censored from the media. And when she gave me her genetic materials, it was a way of kind of subverting that to create a portrait of her, pushing against that censorship. But her concern was that she'd appear too masculine because of her genetic sex. And so when we created the initial portrait, it was 2 portraits, one that was androgynous and one that was parameterized female based on the software generation of the portrait. And so it began in its first as this pushing against these identity stereotypes around gender and sex.
Also es ist offen für alle grundsätzlich natürlich. Wir haben ein sehr inklusives Thema auch und ein hoffentlich ganz breiten Programm, sodass man hierher kommen kann und einfach nur eine Ausstellung sehen oder sich vertiefen innerhalb dem ganz großen Konferenzprogramm. Aber weil wir wirklich auch gerne sehr viel Diskussion und auch Theorie und so eine Bühne dafür anbieten natürlich, haben wir dann eine große Kontingenz von Studenten, die hierher kommen. Also es kommt dann wirklich große Gruppen von der ganzen Welt von Studenten, die auf den Medienwissenschaften oder Design oder Kunst, Hochschulen. Und das ist ein wichtiger Teil des Publikums auch.
I think what struck me the most is sort of the people and the energy here, and how there's so many different types of designers and different thinkers all in one place, and it's just such an interesting space to be in, particularly when we go inside the talks. There are so many well-informed people up there on the stage sharing their ideas, and how everyone in that space is sort of all there absorbing the different ideas and opinions.
Bei diesem Festival dieses Jahr, was lag Ihnen da am meisten am Herzen?
Dieses Festival, es ist ja die 31. Ausgabe des Festivals, und letztes Jahr haben wir ja so einen großen Jubiläum gemacht und die Themen waren sehr breit, wie sagt man das, aufgeschlagen, oder? Und dieses Jahr ist es sehr fokussiert, und für mich ist es eigentlich ein Fokus auf die auch ganz alarmierenden politischen Entwicklungen von heute, wenn wir über Populismus und neue reaktionäre Strömungen innerhalb der Kultur, und wir befassen uns ganz konsequent und versuchen ja auch irgendwie einen Widerstand und ein mehr inklusives Ort für Kulturschaffen zu machen.
And what is this exhibition that we're seeing right behind us?
It's a single artwork. It's got 5 or 6 components, and it's called the Hate Library. The exhibition explores the use of language by far-right communities and groups in contemporary Europe, and it focuses really on their use of online tools and forums for collaboration and discussion.
What were you trying to raise awareness for?
In part, it documents just a few of the stances adopted by these kinds of communities and groups, but also it looks at the funny way in which we're seeing this confusing overlap between the public front stage presentation of new far-right parties and groups and the realities of the online activist backstage conversations that happen between the members. So we're trying to raise awareness of how that backstage is now visible in the front stage if you know where to look online. And all of this material is publicly available, it's still there, and it's just a few clicks away from a Google search page.
So you see, like, around there are like the 12 history books here, and this discovers like how different groups and parties over Europe like use online communication for their own means, like to spread hate on the one hand, but to mobilize also their constituencies on the other hand. So my contribution was actually because I'm working on Greece and on the rise of neo-Nazism in Greece, to compile such a history book, and also we talked about how things evolve, also like the connection between the national, like how things are going on in one country and another, and how these different far-right parties and groups like connect transnationally, how they form like common discourses, how they mobilize to similar events, and like how they spread similar hate messages. Around here, like what we see around is like from the one very big neo-Nazi forum, and around, and that's also the interesting thing about this exhibition, is like you see the main forums where parties and groups like discuss online. I mean, basically it's about discussion as well, like how hate is also like evolving in discussions and how it's like reinforcing.
We're looking at one of 12 books that we called history books, and in doing so we were thinking about that long didactic history of textbooks and educational resources. Each of these books takes one national situation and focuses on the online communication between members of a particularly active nationalist network, a party or group in that country. So each book's dedicated to a different country and dedicated to a different party. They're all countries from Europe, partner countries as well as EU members. And all we get is a tiny slice of the exchanges that could be found in the publicly open discussion lists from those members.
So why was this topic personally to you important?
We see things changing around. We see like how this hate like transgresses from online communities to our daily life, and also how this turns back like in the success of far-right parties and the general nationalist tide that's going on in Europe. And so I think it's also something to yeah, I think it's important that we have something like this here on the Transmediale and in general to open a discourse that I think many people are not aware of, that these discourses exist and that they are not just discourses because there's always action behind as well. And yeah, to raise awareness, especially for those people who are coming here, and that this is an urgent issue that we should address in different forms.
Yeah, so the Finding Fanon project has been our ongoing conversation, our unfinished conversation, to quote Stuart Hall, about our friendship and how that makes sense given the history of post-colonialism, given our situation in a capitalist environment. So how do we make sense of our kind of conversations, our laughs, our WhatsApp conversations, with this kind of burden of history?
You saw a playing of images across a seemingly post-apocalyptic landscape, both in real life, but also across a virtualized environment, utilizing the Grand Theft Auto video game engine. And I think I'm not wrong in saying that we are still in a moment in time where the effects of colonialism are still surrounding us. And so what David and I are doing with this project is opening that up, as David mentioned, by considering our own positions to begin with. You know, so those stories, although there is an element of breathing a fictioning across a landscape, there is the experience of my family being paperless migrants coming to the UK, experiencing being treated like vermin and so on. And then, of course, David coming from a middle class and white background, his own grandfather's experience and those of his other family members that connect with privilege.
I think it opens up a space for that conversation to take place, and it reminds people that to reflect on their own position, not only in this society but globally. And yeah, art is a good space to do that, but then our art is art that tries to speak to a wider public. So it's not just, you don't have to understand the theories of Fanon to understand the work. The work is about our lived experience of this situation.
You've already mentioned Fanon, and your work is called Finding Fanon. Who is Frantz Fanon?
Okay. Frantz Fanon is a radical thinker and psychiatrist who wrote a lot about trying to release the bonds of colonialism. He was writing at the time, he came from Martinique, and he saw the effects of colonial culture on his own self and how he thought about the world, and tried to deconstruct that. I mean, this was in the 40s, 50s, and they look at not only the psychological effects of racism, but then the systemic effects and how that affects our global lives.
I'd like to get back to your artwork. So we talked about post-colonialism, Frantz Fanon. What did the process look like, your artistic process?
Wow, it's a great question. So I think in a nutshell, when we started to get together, and even with one of our first projects, which is called Biters, which looked at ideas of appropriation within the gallery space, so taking hip-hop beats and rhymes, stealing them and conjoining them together to create something new, we knew straight away what it was that we needed to do. I think in this case with the Fanon project, we were thinking a lot about words, monologues, visuals that travel and take you on a journey, but again, not necessarily having to be so literal with those visuals. moving with the viewer and assisting them. Additionally, with a soundtrack as well. So, talking about our own interests as to approaching how you create a sound, thinking about some of our favorite video games, whether that's Super Metroid or Street Fighter, and really galvanizing that. So, we're very, I'd say, what I love about the way we work together is we're very ad hoc. We don't need to have a whole kind of charter of, things we note down. We know what needs to be done, and we know that we just need to keep hitting at that again and again. And also being remotely kind of from one another, David being based in Brighton and me being based in London, we're not always in the same physical space. So the virtual space becomes a really interesting environment for us to have those conversations.
Yeah, the physical reality of making, Finding Fanon 2, which is the work that's made inside Grand Theft Auto, was us sitting in our own respective apartments, Larry sitting at his computer in London and me sitting at my computer in Brighton, and communicating through Skype while we try and find each other in the Grand Theft Auto world. So, and it sometimes took 5, 10, half an hour sometimes to actually find each other, to be able to take the shots of us walking together, because you can't do it on the same machine. You have to have your own consoles and then in order to say get high up in the sky, so you have that first falling shot, we had to steal a plane. And in order to steal a plane, you have to level up in the game, which means stealing lots of cars and shooting people and things. So it's sort of there's this whole other world of the artwork that you don't see, which is this kind of us inside the game and kind of trying to use it to subvert it in a way.
Ideally, what would you want a visitor to understand when he or she experiences your performance or the videos?
Very simple for me anyway. We're talking about voices and stories that usually are silenced, especially where the media is concerned. When discussions around migrants are brought to the table, the only thing that is considered are negative myths concerning people acting like animals or draining resources, when really in actual fact, if we look at what the colonial model is, it's actually that's actually what is being said of the so-called migrants, as it were. So it's bringing stories that otherwise have not been represented. Of course, there are people who try to push that forward, but I think with what I would hope to see with the work is that it engages with people in a way that they see the humanity in the oppressions that people have experienced and continue to experience. This isn't something that's simply historical. The history is now.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the work acts as in some sort of mirror, that the viewer can see themselves in there and try and understand and actually try and deconstruct their own position and where they fit into this whole story, and try and understand this multiplicity of viewpoints, in order to just create empathy and understanding of how the world works.
I think it's important that we have something like this here on the Transmediale and in general to open a discourse that I think many people are not aware of, that these discourses exist and that they are not just discourses, because there's always action behind as well. And to raise awareness, especially for those people who are coming here, and that this is an urgent issue that we should address in different forms.
I would say that the Transmediale is quite unique because even if I think back to Sydney, we don't have anything quite like this, where this whole festival is so sort of academically driven, but really gives new insights into the world of design, and particularly what is of the now, and looking towards the future, and future speculation is not a sort of commonplace festival concept that we have throughout the world.
Well, one of the really nice things about coming here to Transmediale is that it can speak to a mixed community of people who are interested in media and critical media practices, and so maybe understand publishing, the idea of the changing uses of the internet made by subcultures and minority community groups, and can combine that with a sadly relevant discussion about the political climate, not only here in Germany, but all across Europe. So it's those different constituencies and how they might come together in something like an art exhibition, which is fully public.
I think Transmediale is a really perfect venue for this exhibition because it's always been this festival that celebrates the critical in art and technology, and that's really exactly what this work is about. It's about showing this emerging technology, but also critiquing its own form, this kind of self-reflexive act. And so I think that's really what Transmediale has always been about.
I think it's amazing that, you know, we're coming to an international space, one that, from our own experiences, you know, attracts so many people. So it's amazing to be under this hub with so many other artists and also fellow British-based artists, Lawrence Leck, Yuri Patterson. I think I'm going to be more ambitious in saying that I don't see our work primarily and simply just existing in gallery spaces. I think both mine and David's works have existed out of those types of formats. So, you know, utilizing the internet or utilizing, I don't know whether that's records or things like that. So I think it's another opportunity to be able to connect with people, but I don't see it as the be-all and end-all. I think it's an interesting potential space, the gallery space as it were, but I think there's always this question of, okay, well, how can we communicate with people? You know, because let's be honest, there are also people who will never go to gallery spaces. In that self, that kind of represents its own tragedy as to the way that society kind of governs people. However, at the same time, there are people who simply don't want to go to those spaces. So if they don't want to, do we need to force them? No. How do we engage in another way? That's an ongoing question.
Yeah, having said that, I think Transmediale gave a really good context for the work. I mean, you know, it's placed us inside this whole, the geopolitical neoliberal debate, and also thinking around digitality and migration and all of these things that are in the work. So it made a lot of sense for us to be here and to, you know, actually embody it in some way.
Wo sehen Sie die Transmediale denn in 10 Jahren?
In 10 Jahren als ein sehr selbstverständliches Festival, weil heute ist es ein Festival und ich frage mich jedes Jahr, warum, weil wir haben ein sehr großes Publikum, aber ich kriege manchmal den Frage, was ist es eigentlich? Ja, wofür dient es, so ein Festival zu machen? Und ist das nicht nur sozusagen ein Nischenphänomen, was mir als sehr, sehr komisch vorkommt in einer Zeit, wo eigentlich alle über Digitalisierung sprechen, Digitalisierung als Drohung, Digitalisierung als Chance und sowas. Und ich hoffe, dass wir sozusagen in eine Zeit eingestiegen dann sind, wo wir nicht mehr uns fragen, wird das Utopie oder Dystopie, aber wo es selbstverständlich ist, dass diese digitale Fragen wirklich Kernfragen unseres Gegenwart sind. Und deswegen sind wir so ein hybriden Festival, die dafür sehr gut vorbereitet sind. Und sozusagen, dass es auch irgendwie in den Mainstream als solches wahrgenommen wird, weil ich denke, wir bieten da eine sehr wichtige Stimme.
Das war es auch schon von der Transmediale 2018. Viele gegenwärtige Probleme und Phänomene, die hier aufgegriffen und künstlerisch diskutiert werden. Mir hat es unglaublich viel Spaß gemacht. Ich hoffe, euch auch. Wir sehen uns beim nächsten Mal. Tschüss.